Once a superpower that spanned half the globe, the Soviet Union crumbled in 1991, leaving the world stunned. What led to the collapse of one of history's most powerful empires? There is not one single reason which caused the Soviet Empire to unravel, but a myriad of systemic problems and avoidable catastrophes that brought the Soviet Union to an end. In this video, we unravel the key reasons behind the Soviet Union's dramatic collapse and how it reshaped the global landscape. Soviet Union's war in Afghanistan. The protracted and costly war in Afghanistan was one of the key factors contributing to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Since 1979, the Soviet military became embroiled in a conflict with the Afghan Mujahideen guerrilla forces in order to protect vital oil supply routes. Initially, the Soviet Union hoped to gain economic and political benefits from this conflict. However, all calculations quickly turned to smoke in the face of the enormous costs brought about by the war. The Soviet military, trained to fight on large battlefields with tanks, air power, and strategic nuclear weapons, proved helpless against the treacherous terrain of Afghanistan and the flexible guerrilla tactics of the Mujahideen. Throughout the decade from 1979 to 1989, the Soviet Union poured massive military and economic resources into the Afghan quagmire. The consequences were approximately 15,000 Soviet soldiers killed, 50,000 others wounded, and an estimated $50 billion in damages to the Soviet economy at a time when it was already stagnant and public confidence was severely shaken. The war in Afghanistan was a fatal blow, hastening the decline of the Soviet Union. The failing Soviet economy. The Soviet economy was designed to avoid the boom and bust cycles that are characteristic of capitalist countries. As a result, the Soviet Union achieved impressive growth rates during the period 1928 to 1989, excluding wartime periods. However, this growth was not without its drawbacks. Soviet citizens had to sacrifice living standards and consumer goods abundance in order to achieve high economic growth. Signs of economic decline became evident during Brezhnev's rule in the 1970s. One of the causes of this decline was inefficient economic decision-making. A notable example was the decision in 1976 when the Soviet Union shifted from a broad policy of expanding production through increased labor and capital to a more focused policy of efficient resource utilization. The consequence was a worsening scarcity of essential consumer goods, rampant corruption, and the strong development of the second economy, also known as the black market. Labor productivity also declined due to inefficient labor utilization. In fact, there were more jobs than workers, making it difficult to lay off employees. Even when laid off, they could easily find new jobs, as the Constitution guaranteed employment to keep workers in place. Managers even paid higher wages than necessary. Despite having abundant natural resources, such as natural gas and oil reserves, the Soviet economy still relied on market prices for these export commodities. When oil and gas prices sharply declined in the 1980s, the Soviet Union's economic growth rate was severely affected. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster. In his memoir published in 1996, Mikhail Gorbachev affirmed that the real cause of the collapse of the Soviet Union was the Chernobyl disaster. On April 26, 1986, during a safety test, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant experienced a serious accident, causing an explosion that blew off the roof of the reactor building. The explosion released radioactive dust and debris over a large area. However, thousands of residents in the nearby town of Pripyat, as well as the entire Soviet Union, were completely unaware of the disaster. The reactor continued to burn, releasing radioactive material into the air, while the people in Kyiv, a city with millions of inhabitants, were celebrating International Workers' Day in May. Eventually, under increasing international pressure, Mikhail Gorbachev and the Soviet Union were forced to admit the nuclear disaster. Soviet citizens were mobilized to participate in the cleanup of the radioactive debris, extinguish the fires, and isolate the affected area. Approximately 800,000 Soviet reservists were mobilized for this campaign, with an estimated cost of $235 billion. But the true cost of Chernobyl, and perhaps the reason why Gorbachev and many Soviet historians consider it the main cause of the collapse of the Soviet Union, is the human casualties and the loss of trust in the government. Thousands of people had to be evacuated from the 30-kilometer exclusion zone around the plant and could never return home. Abandoned dogs and cats had to fend for themselves, and family photos still remained on the walls of deserted houses. Under Gorbachev's policy of glasnost, openness, the truth began to be revealed. The truth is that the design of the Chernobyl reactor, as well as numerous other reactors operating throughout the Soviet Union, had serious flaws. In fact, these flaws had already caused several minor accidents across the Soviet Union, including at reactor number 4 prior to 1986. Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of perestroika and glasnost. In 1985, after the departure of his predecessor, Gorbachev implemented reforms when he was elected General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. From the beginning, Gorbachev strongly condemned corruption and advocated for policies such as peaceful coexistence based on equality, national liberation, and self-determination, as well as an end to the arms race. At the party conference in February 1986, Gorbachev presented the necessity of perestroika, or economic restructuring. He defined perestroika in 3 main areas: economic-social, modernizing the machinery industry as the foundation for restructuring the national economy and redirecting society; combining planning with the development of monetary exchange relations, creating economic conditions for autonomous and financially responsible enterprises that are not dependent on state subsidies, and forming large scientific and technical complexes. Politically, democratizing at all levels, expanding powers and autonomy for territorial regions. In foreign affairs, preventing nuclear war, transitioning from confrontation to genuine disarmament, and strengthening socialist international cooperation. In simple terms, perestroika aimed to improve the economic foundation, continue strong investment in technology, and enhance citizen participation in the existing political system. However, Gorbachev's explanations of perestroika changed throughout the implementation process, leading to different interpretations of its goals. The economic restructuring caused unforeseen consequences. Instead of producing what the economy truly needed, managers focused only on meeting the demands of their respective industries. This led to an excess of unnecessary products and severe shortages of essential goods. Alongside perestroika, Gorbachev also implemented the policy of glasnost, or openness. Initially, glasnost aimed to bring more transparency and openness to events within and outside the country, as well as the policies of the party. However, this policy inadvertently exposed mistakes and corruption within the Soviet system. The Chernobyl disaster became even worse for the Soviet Union, as glasnost allowed information to be freely disseminated. Glasnost had significant impacts on public awareness. The collapse of the Eastern Bloc and the end of the Cold War. The perestroika reform policies and the glasnost openness policy of Mikhail Gorbachev aimed to reform the Soviet system and inadvertently sparked a wave of simmering opposition in Eastern Europe. The loosening of information control and allowing a certain level of freedom of speech created conditions for people in these countries to express their dissent against Soviet interference in their internal affairs. Poland, one of the Eastern European countries with a strong tradition of struggle, was the first place where this wave of resistance erupted. Since the early 1980s, the Polish people have taken to the streets to protest against shortages of goods, food, and basic necessities. The Solidarity trade union was established with the initial goal of fighting for the rights of workers, but later became a symbol of the Polish nation's desire for autonomy. After many years, Solidarity achieved victory in the 1989 elections, paving the way for Poland's separation from the Soviet Union. The events in Poland set off a domino effect throughout Eastern Europe. Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and other countries also witnessed strong movements to break away from the Soviet Union. The fall of the Berlin Wall, a symbol of the East-West divide, on November 9, 1989, marked the end of the Cold War and the end of Soviet influence in Eastern Europe. The dissolution of the Soviet Union. The collapse of the Eastern Bloc dealt a devastating blow to the Soviet Union, forcing the central government in Moscow to face a wave of rebellions within its multicultural empire. In 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, the Baltic republics of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia declared their intention to break away from the Soviet Union. Shortly thereafter, Armenia, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia also joined the movement for independence. Boris Yeltsin, a respected leader of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, played a crucial role in the disintegration of the Soviet Union. He declared Russia's sovereignty and openly supported the democratic movement in other republics. In August 1991, a failed coup attempt to overthrow Gorbachev took place. However, the coup's failure only strengthened Yeltsin's position and accelerated the process of the Soviet Union's dissolution. On December 8, 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus signed the Belovezha Accords, declaring the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the establishment of the Commonwealth of Independent States. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned as the president of the Soviet Union, officially marking the end of the once mighty empire. The red flag with the hammer and sickle was lowered from the Kremlin, making way for the tricolor flag of Russia. This event reshaped the world's political map and opened a new chapter for Russia and the former Soviet republics.